All right. So welcome everyone. Welcome to the Work Life Play Lab. This is a webinar series that I just launched and I'm really excited about it. The theme ongoing is to how to cultivate more workplace resilience, more work-life balance, and create more sustainable success. And these are principles that we're looking at through the lens of work, but they do apply to your life as a whole. So even if, you have some kind of an issue that's not work related, these themes are still going to be able to apply to you. But they're specifically aimed towards people who might be struggling with needing more resilience at work, dealing with burnout, or just any of the chronic stress issues that a lot of people are dealing with. So with each webinar, I'm going to have a special guest, an expert who's going to come on and bring some tools and tips that can be helpful for you. And today, I'm really happy that we have Dr. Danielle Sonnenberg here. She's going to be talking about the importance of emotional agility. So very excited that she's here with us today. But before we go any further, I just want to, invite people to just kind of be here. And that might mean exhaling. It might mean, leaving your mental to-do list or your deadlines or whatever you just, we're dealing with out the door so you can be present here for the time that we're here because you set aside this time and we would love for you to get the most out of it. So take a breath, exhale, be here, and welcome. So how this workshop is going to go is that we're going to take turns. I'm going to present first, and then on the half hour, Danielle is going to present. And throughout any of these presentations, at any point, if a question comes to you, feel free to put it in the chat. And then I'll take a couple of live questions if I have time, and if not, we'll save all the live questions until the very end after both Danielle and I have finished presenting. So without further ado, I'm going to get started here. And I just want to start with one question, which is that, would you like to be at your best no matter what is happening in your life, in your business, at work, or in your relationships? Meaning, no matter what circumstances are happening, would you like to be able to be at your best? And so that's what's on offer here today. And that's what I'm going to start getting into. So setting the stage a little more broadly, I don't know if you have heard the term VUCA. It's an acronym, and it stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And it's a term that was coined late in the 20th century, but it's really been used more and more in the past couple of decades to really point to the sort of late capitalism environment that we're living in. So, our parents and our grandparents really didn't prepare us for this VUCA world, right? The post-war 20th century American dream was very much that you work hard, you put in the time, and you'll find stability, success, happiness, and then at the end of it all, a nice retirement. And that was our parents and our grandparents' world. Things have changed a lot since then. They would work oftentimes for their same job 40 years, right? They'd be in the same job for 40 years. They'd be home for dinner at 6 o'clock, and they'd have the weekends to throw the ball with their kids, and there was no answering emails into the night. There was a lot more loyalty between employers and employees. And nowadays, I think the average period of time that most employees are at their jobs are I think it's 4 years, which is 4 versus 40, so things have really changed quite a bit. And so again, we're applying this old playbook, this 20th century playbook to this VUCA world. And it's not really working. I mean, you can work really hard. You can put in all your effort. You can burn the candle at both ends and still not get the outcome that you want. And I've seen this happen over and over again. People work hard, try to perform at give it their all the way their employers want them to do, and still get laid off because at the end of the day, it's about the numbers. And, if you're running your own business, the same thing can happen. You can burn the candle at both ends. You can, answer emails into the night, and still your business might fail. So it's just, there are all these unpredictable factors that are happening in the economy and in the work world that we can't plan for. Who could have planned for the pandemic? I mean, look how that completely flipped our entire the way we work, not to mention how many businesses did go out of business during that time. Some businesses thrived, others went out of business. We could never have seen that coming. So this is the VUCA world that we're living in, and trying to apply these old rules just ends up burning us out. And the other aspect of it is just that a lot of what's driving people, to work so hard and to answer emails all night, or Slacks or texts or whatever it is that they feel like it's a survival issue. It's that they feel that oftentimes, if I don't do that, I'm going to be the one who's let go. Or if I don't work myself to the bone, my business is not going to survive. So, a lot of us are working in this kind of environment of scarcity and survival mentality all the time. And that in and of itself is a recipe for burnout. So what we need, because we've been using this old playbook, we need a new playbook. We need a new playbook for the VUCA world. And the VUCA world is, again, I'm speaking through the lens of business, but it's so many other things, right? If you think about how people are being affected by climate change, for example, I mean, that's another way that VUCA is affecting people day in and day out, their livelihood, as well as just their lives in general. So how can we more effectively deal with this kind of world of unpredictability that we're living in? So what we need is a new operating system, a new way of seeing, and a new way of being. So, me personally, I have certainly been affected by this VUCA situation. When I was graduating from graduate school, it was 2008. So bad timing on my part to be starting a new career. The economy was collapsing, and I was looking at the news and I was like, okay, what does this mean for my new career? So that's when I came, into to basically fresh start career, as things are sort of falling apart in the US economy. And so that was a very stressful time in terms of, for me, uh, you know, taking a job that burned me out because it was the job I needed. It was the one that was available, but it was a terrible fit. And that ended up, burning me out, and then ending up being unemployed because there really weren't that many jobs around. So, you know, and like many people, like a lot of my clients, because we were given this old story, right? If you just work hard, things are going to work out. When that doesn't work out, you start to ask the question, what am I doing wrong? Because, in an individualistic society like the US, the onus is on the individual. It's your fault if you're not making it. You must be doing something wrong. So I was asking myself that question, what am I doing wrong? Why can't I make this work? And a lot of my clients are asking that question of themselves. And so, one thing I have to tell people is it's not you. you know, this is the world we're living in. You're using an old playbook, but there are things you can do to immune yourself to the constant stress and anxiety of this environment we're living in. So for me, um, I'm I've always been into personal development and self-help even before I went back to school to become a psychotherapist. I was always reading, Eastern philosophy and, pretty much anything I could get my hands on. But I happened to stumble upon this emerging field of thought that really did change the way that I started seeing things and the way that I was operating in life. And it helped me really connect the dots in different ways and tap into resilience that I didn't even really know that I had. I mean, I'm a pretty resilient person. I always have been, but I was really kind of limited in terms of the amount of resilience that I was really tapping into. So I that's really what I'm here to share with you is some key points of that philosophy. which can help you perhaps navigate this VUCA world a little bit better. So the key point is that it's all about our relationship to our thoughts. Now, that doesn't mean that it's about the actual, like what kinds of thoughts you have. In other words, it's not the content of your thoughts. It's not that you need to change your thoughts. A lot of different schools of thought will tell you need to change your thoughts. If you change your thoughts, you'll be happier. That's actually really hard to do. So that's not what I'm talking about, but it is about the relationship you have to your thoughts, how we use thought, the meaning that we give thought, which thoughts we pay attention to. And so this relationship has a that directly affects our performance, our energy levels, and our levels of well-being. So another important point is that we've been taught that reason and our intellect, that's really where the juice is, that's the source of our talents, our skills, our success, our achievements, that it's all because of our intellect. Now, the intellect, I'm not arguing, has amazing gifts. It is an amazing gift. However, it's often when we disengage from the intellect that we find our greatest resources. Now, this is the secret that other cultures already know and that we've forgotten. But, this is kind of a first world problem, I would say. It's kind of a specifically Western first world problem that we're in our heads all the time. Other cultures, including Eastern philosophies, but a lot of other cultures are aware of the value of different modes of consciousness. And in fact, again, some of these modes of thinking are things that we have completely dismissed or devalued. But one obvious example, which in the West we have started to see the value in again, which is meditation. But even in the West, we tend to use meditation in a very we put it in a box in a way. Like, I'm gonna meditate for 30 minutes, and I feel better, and then I'm gonna get back in my head again. So it kind of doesn't exactly work if you don't really take it into your life in a different way. I mean, it works, makes you feel better for a minute, but then you jump back into your intellect. So the intellect is it's a limited tool. I mean, again, very valuable, but it's limited. And since we were in, grade school, we have been trained to orient towards the intellect. So, 5 or 6 years old, we're going in and we're getting trained to sharpen this intellect. And again, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's just that we don't know when to disengage from it. So the most important thing is to learn when to use it and when to put it down. And when I say put it down, I mean drop out of it into the present. So some ways that we often overuse or misuse the intellect are, I'm sure you're familiar with the term analysis paralysis, right? Where you like analyze something to death to the point that you like actually shut down because you don't find the solution or the decision, and you just end up back at square one. So you don't find the answer that you were seeking. Indecisiveness is another way we can just go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and get stuck and never actually reach the decision. The way that we kind of evaluate ourselves and our lives, like, why am I not more successful? What am I doing wrong? Or just a general, like, how am I doing in life? Am I doing okay? I don't know. I think I'm not doing as well as this person. So then comparison is another way that we kind of get stuck up in our heads. So general overthinking, a lot of us do a lot of overthinking, problem solving, over planning. These are all ways that we are misusing and overusing the intellect to our detriment. Because the intellect totally fails when it comes to asking these big life questions, such as, how do I find fulfillment? Or how do I navigate this VUCA world? Like, how do I handle this complicated work situation? The intellect, it's not able to actually come up with an actual good solution for that. So we get lost in there and we don't actually get what we need. And we certainly don't get to what we really want, which is peace or security, safety. Those things actually do not exist in the intellect because it's not the function of the intellect. The function of the intellect is to look for problems and then find them and then solve them. It's not to find peace and ease. So if you're in your head, you're not in peace. And that's just like why so many people in the Western world are running around with anxiety all the time. The intellect wants things to be linear and it wants to have control. So in a VUCA world, if your linear goals and plans are not coming to pass, you're going to be anxious a lot of the time, or you're going to be disappointed or frustrated. And same thing, if you're spending a lot of energy trying to have control of things, you're also going to be really exhausted and really frustrated, because in a VUCA world, you don't have control out of a lot. You do have control out of certain things, but there's a lot you don't have control over. So I used to do so much thinking about my business and my life and my career. How do I, get more successful? Maybe I just need to follow this formula, or maybe I need to if I just have the right marketing plan, right? Or maybe I need to do more analysis on this area, more market research, more this, more that. But the more I tried to figure things out, the less I tried to figure things out, the easier my life started to get. Like the more I got out of my head. Because when my mind was clearer, then I was operating more in the present. And turns out the present is where everything you need can be found. There's actually, I'd say, very little, if anything, of use in the past or the future, which is when we're in our head, we're usually in the past or the future. There's just not that much of use in those in that function. And you also, like, you don't need this internal dialogue in order to get through life. You don't need it. In fact, it's often a detriment, but we're so used to it, we think that it means something. So we think it's important, the chatterbox. We think we should be listening to it. So the question is then, if you're not using your intellect to gain your success or your fulfillment or your happiness, then, well, what the heck are you doing, right? I mean, that's like, we don't, we're so used to doing everything through our intellect, or most everything. So then what do you do? Well, these deeper thought processes that these other cultures have not forgotten, that they, still utilize on a regular basis. We're having to kind of relearn how to tap into those. And when you do, though, this is the thing, like when you learn to do that, then it's like having the wind in your sails. So, I mean, I guess another analogy I would use is like right now, if you're like trying to live your life through your intellect most of the time, it's like you're battery powering your life, so it's batteries have a short, they run out of juice pretty quickly. But if you suddenly remember, oh, all I have to do is actually just plug directly into the grid, and I'll have like all this electricity available to me nonstop. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer, but we just haven't been doing that. We have moved away, been conditioned away from that. So it's learning to drop out of the intellect, let all, like, relax and let all of that noise kind of go to the background, and move more into what I would call, there are terms, words are like pointers, right? So one term you could use would be intuitive body, or intuitive body. Another word would be deeper intelligence, because we all have this reservoir of deeper intelligence that's always replenishing, but we're just not used to going there. We're not used to listening there. So again, it's a deeper kind of a listening. It's a more receptive frame of mind. than we're used to being in. We're used to being in a very kind of active, proactive frame of mind. And this is the part that a lot of Westerners find challenging, is changing the channel, because we are so used to listening everything that to everything that the ego and the intellect and the conditioned mind are feeding us. We think that it's telling us something important, and it's not. It's really not. So learning to move away from the assessments and the analysis and the constant storytelling, it takes some relearning. It takes some training. As I mentioned, those of us in the West, right? We kind of like this idea that we can have this linear reality, that we can make plans, and that gives us a sense of control. But the thing you actually start to learn if you start looking in this direction, or what you start to see, is that linear reality actually is an illusion. It's not. If you've heard the phrase "make a plan and God laughs," or life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. I mean, that's what happens, right? Life is going to have a life of its own, and it doesn't really care about our plans. So, not that we shouldn't make any plans, it's just that we should make our plans loosely and hold them lightly. But it's actually more valuable to be living more in this responsive state, tapping into these kind of this deeper intelligence. Because when you learn that you can rely on it, and you can, and that's the thing, that because we like this illusion of control of a linear reality, and we kind of try to cling to that, even though it doesn't work, we still try to cling to it. So it takes some letting go of that. And when you do, when you actually start to see the evidence that you can rely on it, you start getting this different level of trust in yourself, and in this, again, this kind of wisdom that comes forth when you need it. So again, can be challenging at first to learn to trust it. But when you learn to trust it, it allows you to live and navigate in this VUCA world without the anxiety and the fear that living in your intellect all the time is creating. It's like riding a bike, like at first it doesn't feel safe to ride a bike. You want to, it's like, oh no, I need to like put my feet on the ground. I don't like this. But once you actually get a feel for it, it's not only is it so much more easier and efficient to ride a bike than it is to like walk a distance, but it's so much freer. You feel so much freer. You can live in this space of flow, and you don't have to feel so anxious and afraid all the time and hanging on rigidly to things. And so when your mind is present and clear, we can respond to life as it's unfolding, and it's easier to see opportunities, and you can have confidence. You can have confidence that you can handle whatever comes. We do much better when we're present and when we're not in our heads, right? We make better decisions, we get better ideas, we get creative solutions. So insights flow freely, and this creates what I would call true confidence, not a mindset. Because a mindset, again, is like based in your mind, trying to construct the right thoughts and things like that. True confidence is knowing that you can show up and you're going to get the information that you need, and you can handle whatever arises. It's like also it's true productivity too, because what comes out of it is inspired action versus the sort of manic busyness that a lot of people in America are just involved in right now. It's just like, a lot of it is just very rushed, not well thought out. It's very frantic. And so there's a lot of wasted energy and time and draining of resources, your resources personally, that's where the burnout comes in. So, when you're operating in this more place of flow, it's also like you're kind of tapping into what I would call common sense is what it is. When we're in our heads, like there's a lot of drama up there. There's a lot of stories that are kind of getting us derailed. But when we're in the present more, we're really using more common sense. Common sense is coming to us. So once you do make this shift out of your head and into this deeper intelligence, that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about sustainable success, because your mind is less taxed, your body is less stressed, your stress response is way down from where it used to be. You're getting better ideas, you're finding problems to solutions more easily. And I mean, I personally used to be driven by fear. I mean, I had all sorts of stories going on in my head. I was going to be homeless, like my business was going to fail, whatever. I was going to get fired. Survival fears were driving me all the time. And unfortunately, again, these survival scarcity and survival fears are kind of baked into capitalism. They're sort of baked into the philosophy of capitalism. So unlearning them, right, it's like we're dealing with layers of conditioning that we're unlearning, right? But once you start to see through it, it's kind of magical. It's kind of amazing because you start to see like, oh, there's like this 180 that I can do. It's actually not that hard once I start to ride the bike, and then things become so much easier. Because yeah, first part of my life, I was tired, wired, and burnt out all the time. So that's just an introduction of what I would say has been sort of a life-changing philosophy that I've found, and I wanted to offer just some basic points to you to begin to look at. And before I look and see if there are any questions, I do want to just tell you about a little bit of I'm doing a more expanded training on this, which is going to be in a few weeks. It's going to be October 29th. It's going to be 3 trainings on Tuesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern. The dates are October 29th, November 12th, and November 19th. And Nicole is going to put the link to that in the chat so you can check out and see if it's anything interesting that you would like to do. Because I invite you, if this has been interesting to you and you want to find out more, I invite you to come to that, and the way that's going to work is, I'll do a little teaching, like 15, 20 minutes, and then the rest of the session will be us applying this to your life, right? So you can get laser coaching, you can have, we'll have a Q&A so you can apply this to what's going on in your life right now. And now I am going to turn the mic over to Danielle Sonnenberg, and I'm going to just do a brief introduction here. Dr. Danielle Sonnenberg is a professor at Berkeley College, where she teaches courses such as First Year Experience, Introduction to Communications, and Human Relations. Her dissertation, The Emotional Challenges of Teaching Online, explores the difference in emotional connections experienced by professors when teaching online versus in person. She's passionate about asking thought-provoking questions and deeply engaging with the people around her. And she is going to talk today about the importance of emotional agility. So Danielle, take it away.
Thank you so much. Just bear with me one moment while I just get the presentation loaded. I'm very excited about this topic. It's called emotional agility. And emotional agility is a process that allows us to change our behavior so that they align with our values. This concept was created by Dr. Susan David about 20 years ago, and she popularized the term in her book, Emotional Agility: Get Unstuck, Embrace Change, and Thrive and Work in Life. Now, there was an article as well on emotional agility that was in the Harvard Business Review in 2013 that was written by Dr. David and Christina Conglocton. And the article was so popular that it stayed on the magazine's most read list for months. Now, one of the reasons that this article was so popular is that in the workplace, people thought that you shouldn't really show your difficult emotions, that you should be stoic and that you should be happy. But Dr. Susan David turned this idea on its head, and we're going to talk a little bit about why this idea was so popular in this presentation. So again, emotional agility means being able to step outside your old way of thinking, and it means going against our conditioned responses. So what does emotional agility look like? So I have on the left hand that emotionally rigid people automatically say, I am not good at this. Whereas an emotionally agile person says, you know what, I'm still learning. An emotionally rigid person says, I'm not going to try. Whereas an emotionally agile person says, you know what, I think I'm going to give this a shot. And again, an emotionally rigid person says, oh my God, the last time I tried this, it was completely humiliating. Whereas an emotionally agile person says, I learned a lot the last time I tried. So again, it's about perspective and where you're choosing to focus. Now, I want you to think for a moment of the word 16,000 words. That's an incredibly high amount of words. Now, that's the amount of words that you speak daily. Most of those words are not spoken out loud. They're this continuous internal monologue that's going throughout your mind. And if you think about it, right, think when you get up in the morning, you're having this stream of thoughts that are flowing with you throughout the day, through lunch, through the early evening, through the time that you turn into bed. And most of these thoughts consist of positive and negative emotions. And it's completely normal. Everyone does it. So I don't want you to think there's anything wrong with it. So some of these thoughts that as I've mentioned, include good feelings, and some of them include bad feelings. Good feelings are also known as positive feelings in positive psychology, and they're known as happiness, excitement, relaxed, joyful, and bad feelings, also known as negative feelings, include sadness, madness, anger, guilt, and shame. And our society teaches us that we want to run as fast as we can from these negative feelings. We don't want to experience them. We want nothing to do with them. And we want to run towards these good feelings. But I want you to think for a minute and know that this goes against our biology. It's part of our biology to have all of our emotions. And there's a reason for these negative feelings. And even in the workplace, there's a prevailing thought that we shouldn't have these bad feelings. If you just think for a moment of the constant conversation, how are you? Good and you? Good and you? You know, it's constantly this habituation to focus on just being good, that there's no place for being sad or feeling bad or having any of these negative feelings. But we're actually turning away from our biology and turning away from a key moment to focus on our values, which is what I'm going to talk about here. So traditional ways of fixing these difficult feelings are positive affirmations, endless to-do lists, or just immersion in certain tasks. But as we might imagine, these traditional ways do not fix the difficult feelings and they do not make them go away. So Dr. David likes to use this idea of a fish getting hooked on a line. And she says that we get hooked on ideas in two different ways. We're either buying into thoughts or we're trying our best to run away from them as fast as we can by avoiding difficult thoughts. And we're going to talk about these two different ways in details. So as you can see, this cute little stick figure is saying to himself, you suck, you're unlovable, no one liked the pasta you cooked the other day. And he's saying to himself, that sounds about right. And he's buying into the thoughts. When we buy into thoughts, we treat them like facts and then we act accordingly. For example, it might be, it was the same in my last job. I'm not going to try out for that position. Or maybe you didn't fit in middle school and no one liked you. And so when you were asked to join happy hour at your workplace, you say, no, they didn't like me then. There's no way that I'm going to join now. So you're buying into this negative thoughts. So in the article I mentioned earlier, they used a really great example about a woman named Cynthia, who's a senior corporate lawyer with two young children. And she had all this intense guilt about being at home and then at work. And she used to feel guilt both, as I mentioned, at home and in the office. So at home, she would, not be able to give her kids her undivided attention. And at work, she felt like she wasn't giving it her all because she only worked 50 hours and the other employees at work worked 80. So she constantly felt like a failure. And these thoughts would go on over and over again, and she would buy into them. Okay. So the next way that we get hooked onto thoughts is about suppression or repression. So when you try to suppress a thought, it comes back even more. I'm sure some of you have heard of the white bear study. It was by a Harvard professor in 1987, Dr. Daniel Wagner. And he conducted an experiment where he told participants not to think of white bears. And as you can imagine, the participants that were told not to think of white bears were paradoxically thought more of them than the participants that were told to think of them. So this is also known as ironic process theory. So, and this is ways that people go through sort of mental gymnastics. They're trying their best to get rid of these difficult thoughts, all the while worrying what they mean, and then paradoxically making it even more likely that these thoughts are going to continue with increasing frequency and intensity. Anyone who has dreamed of chocolate cake or French fries while they're on a diet has experienced this. It's the idea of wanting to run away from these bad feelings, but you can't avoid them. So we try to run away through them by numbing ourselves with social media or eating or alcohol. So in the example I shared, Cynthia was absorbed by guilt and she told these voices to go away more and more. And as you can imagine, the voices became even louder and louder. And I want you just to remember that when you're trying to avoid these difficult thoughts of sadness or guilt or shame, you're cutting off a key piece of data that can actually be really important in helping you figure out where your values are and acting in your own self best interest. So, only when you get targeted into these feelings, then you can begin to understand what they are signaling. So emotional agility is again is when effective leaders they're not buying into, as we mentioned, or they're not trying to suppress their inner experiences. Instead, they're approaching them in a mindful, values-driven, productive way, developing emotional agility. Now, the magic question that you're probably wondering now is how do you develop emotional agility? Well, first of all, I want to remind you that it's a process and to be kind to yourself. Again, our society, as Ruth had mentioned, is an individualistic Western society, and we want to rush, rush, rush. So, this is not a topic that's spoken about. So, I want you to remember to give yourself grace and give yourself time and be patient with yourself. You don't develop emotional agility by quick fixes and yelling at yourself and by being mean. So the method that we're going to talk about here is a method called acceptance and commitment therapy. It was created by University of Nevada psychologist Stephen Hayes, and it consists of the following steps: recognizing your patterns, labeling your thoughts and emotions, accepting them, and then acting on your values. So the first step of this of ACT, also known as acceptance and commitment therapy, is noticing your thoughts. Anyone who has taken a class with me is reminded of the fact that you can't change anything until you're aware of it. So become aware of what you want to change. You have to first pause and be present. Again, this goes against our society because it means having to stop, right? We feel that we're productive if we're going, going, going. But in order to make a change, you first need to become aware of what you want to change. And then and only then can you begin to make the changes. So if you give yourself a moment, you might begin to start to realize and notice your thoughts. For example, Cynthia, she began to realize these self recriminations played like a broken record again and again, repeating the same messages. You're not a good mother. You're not a good employee. And only when she started to realize these thoughts, then she could start to make changes. Recognizing your patterns. Most of our patterns are rigid and repetitive. This is when you notice a pattern again and again. So for Cynthia, it was the pattern of the scenario of not being good enough at work and not being good enough at home. And she's this broken record of this rigid pattern. She began to realize that these thoughts were occurring. And again, only with awareness can there be any change. So what's a pattern that you might be hooked on? Maybe it's a comparison of people on social media, or maybe it's a feeling of being depressed at a certain time of day. And, I love this quote because it's a reminder of the importance of awareness. You have to realize you're stuck before you can do anything about being stuck. So the first step is pausing and connecting, and then recognizing your patterns. And then you can start the next step. The next step is labeling your thoughts. Now, this is an incredible, powerful practice because it means that you begin to realize your thoughts for what they are. They're fleeting thoughts. They don't have to control you. Just because you had a thought does not mean that it's going to be with you for the rest of your life. I remember the first time that I had that realization. It was incredibly powerful because then I realized, okay, that thought is just a fleeting thought. I don't have to react to it and I don't have to respond to it. So just as you call a spade, you call a thought, and an emotion. Thoughts are not facts, right? They're not facts. And if you begin to realize who is in control, the thinker or the thought, once you realize you don't have to buy into your thoughts, you have an incredible amount of freedom. We're going to talk about some different ways on how you can become more aware. So the next step is labeling your emotions. So if you see this cute little slide, there's some different emotions and then some words underneath it. But here's a little bit of the emotions and some different words that people use. So for embarrassed, right, we might use isolated, inferior, confused, and many people don't have the vocabulary that they need to identify how they're feeling. So being able to label your emotions is key to become more aware of them, right? So sadness, right? You might be feeling disappointed, or you might be feeling regretful or depressed. They're very different. To be tearful and pessimistic is very different than being disappointed or regretful. To be angry might be annoyed, or you might be offended. So going beyond the obvious umbrella term means to try to identify exactly what you're feeling. And again, that requires awareness and it requires patience. Now, creating space. Instead, creating space between yourself and the emotion. Many people say automatically, I'm sad or I'm depressed. Instead of just using those words, you could say, I am feeling sad. Because as Dr. David says, you're not the cloud, you're the whole damn sky. The emotion is not going to be with you for the rest of your life, even though that emotion may feel incredibly powerful at the moment that you're experiencing it. By simply adding that word, feeling, it creates some distance between you and the powerful emotion. Accepting thoughts. So the opposite of control is acceptance. To sit and accept your thoughts is a very vulnerable practice, right? How many people have you heard who say, I don't want to feel like this. I'm going to run away. I'm going to numb myself. And I don't want you to think that it's incredibly bad to use, social media or whatnot. It's about becoming aware. If you say, okay, I'm feeling bad right now, I'm going to accept that emotion. And then, you know what? It's fine if you want to go turn to other means to try to change that. But the first step is accepting these emotions for what they are. Because as we know, it's much more comfortable to run away from them. Right. And I just want you to remember that when you're accepting these difficult emotions, it doesn't mean that you're saying that these emotions are going to be with you for the rest of your life. It just means that you're accepting them and you're letting yourself experience them. Again, this is a very powerful practice and it requires someone to allow themselves to be vulnerable. So again, when you unhook yourself from these really difficult emotions, you begin to expand your choices. And then, and only then, can you begin to act in a way that aligns with your values. So going back to that example, when Cynthia allowed herself to consider her values, she recognized how much she was, how much she was committed to both her family and her work. She loved being with her children, but she also cared passionately about the pursuit of justice. She realized that she wanted to be home for dinner, and she realized that, that she wanted to resist work interruptions during that time. But she also realized that she wanted to attend many important work trips. And doing that would mean that she might have to miss some of her children's social events. So she undertook to attend many of these events. And she was confident that she was driven by her values, not just these difficult emotions of guilt and shame. And only then did she begin to find a level of peace and fulfillment. And I want you to remember, it's impossible to block out these difficult thoughts and emotions. It's much preferable for you to understand where they're coming from so that you can use them more effectively in your life. Now, quickly, I just want to go into what values-based action means. It means acting in alignment with your core values, even when these difficult emotions push you towards impulsive or unhelpful behavior. And why does it work? It means that your actions are going to be rooted in your values, and you're going to be feeling more of a sense of purpose. And the way to practice this is the first step is identifying your top values. Maybe it's honesty, maybe it's compassion. And there's, if you go on Google, you'll find a slew of different websites that allow you to identify these values. And then and only then can you use these values as a compass when making decisions or handling emotional situations. So the emotional agility application, again, is recognizing your patterns. Maybe you realize that your default reaction is to lash out when things go wrong. So then you recognize that pattern, and then you start to label your emotions. Maybe you label your emotion as frustration. And the third step is accepting and observing. Again, the step requires you to be present and in the moment rather than suppressing or exploding. You acknowledge that maybe frustration is natural in this situation. And remember, these feelings, positive and negative, they're all part of your biology and they're natural. It doesn't mean that the next time you might want to handle it differently, but at that present moment, you're accepting yourself exactly where you are. And the last step is acting with kindness. Perhaps you pause and you take a deep breath and you choose to respond with understanding. This is another opportunity for you to practice grace and self compassion. Strategies for building emotional agility. One of the ways that I build emotional agility is through mindful breathing and meditation. I start each day with breath work or meditation, and it's just a 5 minute practice. I usually use Headspace. I also use Insight Timer. So this slide shows a little bit about what mindful breathing and meditation is. So mindful breathing is engaging in slow, deep breathing or a short meditation to center yourself, right? And why does it work? It allows you to regain your access to a parasympathetic nervous system, which helps you regain and relax when you're emotionally triggered. One way to practice is a 4-7-8 breathing technique, where you're inhaling for 4 seconds, holding for 7, and exhaling for 8. There's also a ton of meditation apps, as I mentioned, Headspace or Insight Timer, or going on YouTube for guided sessions. And one way that you might use this mindful breathing and meditation is before responding to an angry email, you might take 3 deep breaths to prevent an impulsive reaction. And this gives you the space to respond thoughtfully. I can't tell you the amount of times that I've told myself to take a couple of deep breaths or maybe step away from the computer before I responded and wrote an email that I regretted. So this is an opportunity for you to regain composure and control, taking a deep breath, maybe even journaling as well, which we're going to talk about now. So, journaling is an incredibly powerful practice. So, writing down your thoughts and emotions, that's what allows you to clarify them and externalize them and giving you an opportunity to reflect. So this researcher, James Pennebaker, he has showed that writing about difficult emotions can improve your health in the long term. He found that people who wrote about their emotionally charged episodes for just 20 minutes a day for a few days experienced a marked increase in both their physical and mental well-being. And why would it work? Right? It creates a safe space for self reflection and it allows you to see emotional patterns over time. And it gives you a moment to detach for immediate reactions. And you might practice this by jotting down emotional experiences. And you can use different prompts like, what emotion am I feeling right now? What's beneath the surface of this reaction? After a stressful day where you had an intense engagement with a colleague, you might write down what happened and consider how you might handle it differently next time. Another method includes morning pages. You might have heard of the author Julie Cameron, and she has a method called the morning pages where you write 750 words stream of consciousness every day, where again you're getting distance from these deep hurtful emotions and you're being able to write it down and externalize it first thing in the morning. Now, the call to action, again, I want you to remember before you start applying any of these techniques that you want to be kind to yourself. You're adding a new practice into your life. So you might want to pick one small step. One small step might be a daily emotional check in, just spending 5 minutes every day at the end of the day to reflect on your feelings. Week two might be adding mindful breathing or journaling. Okay, and then committing to the process. Emotional agility is not a one time achievement, but it's an ongoing practice. Just remembering that consistency is key. Small steps will add up every day, and it will help you internalize what's driving your behavior. And then, lastly, being patient with yourself. Emotional agility requires self compassion. It's about learning to navigate your emotions without judgment and then acting in alignment with your core values. And lastly, I like to end this presentation with a song from This Is Me from The Greatest Showman. And I will talk about that in a moment.
I am not a stranger to the dark. Hide away, they say, 'cause we don't want your broken parts. I learned to be ashamed of all my scars. Run away, they say, no one will love you as you are. But I won't let them break me down to dust. I know that there's a place for us, for we are glorious. When the sharpest words want to cut me down.
So I wanted to end with that song because it's a powerful reminder to accept all of your emotions, the negative, the quote unquote bad emotions. And remember that these negative emotions, these feelings of sadness or shame, they can drive you closer to your values and what you want to be and who you want to be in this world. So I really appreciate you all spending the time. This is a topic I'm incredibly passionate about, and I'm really excited to get any questions.
Thank you so much, Danielle. That was amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's see if were there any questions in the chat, Nicole?
Yeah, I think we had a couple. Bridget asked if there were any recommendations for one of the apps we mentioned, so Headspace, Insight Timer, Calm. Do you recommend one of these more than the other for the work-life
Sure.
play workshops?
Yeah, I mean, I love Headspace. I think Headspace is a great app just to start off in. I like Insight Timer. Insight Timer has a woman named LXL, who I'm a huge fan of. But both of them are incredibly powerful, and I use them regularly. So I would highly recommend them. Absolutely. Just, a way to implement some of these ideas into your daily life. I think that's the most important thing, is to make it applied.
And then Mark, did you have a question earlier?
Yeah, I put it in the chat. I want to know how to slow myself down when my default mode seems to be the speed of light. Like no matter what activity I find myself engaged in, whether it's cooking dinner or weed whacking or digging holes for planting something or whatever it is, sometimes on the highway too. I mean, I'm just speeding. I find myself going really, really fast and there's nobody chasing me. There's nothing driving me to be that way. And I just wonder what do I do to just slow down?
Well, first of all, I love that you're here. So you're stepping up and you're here. So first, give yourself compassion and grace. Again, as we said in the presentation, there's no way you're going to change anything. So you're already 500 steps above someone who doesn't even have that awareness. Now that you have that awareness, again, now accept it. That's where I am right now. And then slowly start to, what's some different, how can I slow down just by one millisecond a day? And these start to realize, by making these small changes every day, they start to add up. I mean, and then you can also start to think, like, again, which I love, you have this deeper third person in your head. Where am I running to? If you want to go the Freudian expert, where are these deeper thoughts coming from? So again, you can either journal, and you can also become aware and also just time, say how can I just slow down a little bit every day, and remembering all the while to give yourself grace as you're doing this process. Again, you're here, which says a lot about you. So many people are on autoplay throughout their lives. I don't know if you're near New York or in New York, but you go to New York and you see everyone, they're just rushing to get everywhere. That's the default mode.
Right.
And unless you stop and say, I'm going to choose something different, it will easily just run you over. But you have a choice. And in that choice is your power. And your choice to be here is an incredibly important first step. So thank you for that important question and for being vulnerable.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, was that all the questions, Nicole?
Those are all the ones I saw, but if anyone
Okay.
else has any questions,
Yeah, no, and
feel free
if
to
there are
speak
any
up.
if there are any final questions, feel free to unmute and
I just want to say thank you so much to Danielle. I think these are all so important topics, and I echo the importance of having patience and grace, because we all talk about the shoulds, so we should do this and we should do that, and that's just another level of a defense. So if you're going to go on social media, being deliberate with that and saying, I'll be here for 5 minutes, and that's okay. It's when we just go to distractions and we don't really want to admit what we're doing. So being accountable to yourself. So I think all this is amazing work. So thank you to both of you ladies for an amazing conversation.
thank you. Thanks so much for showing up. Yeah, and a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you both so much. This has been helpful.
Wonderful.
Oh, thank you
Thanks,
all. Yeah,
Bridget.
for attending. Yeah.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks again for being here, and hope to see you at another one in the future.